Hey guys, it's Jason Snavely, certified wildlife biologist and founder and president of Drop-Tine Wildlife Consulting, the Drop-Tine Seed Company, and of course, Drop-Tine Podcast. Guys, I've 17 years private wildlife consultant, graduated from Mississippi State University, and one of the things I really enjoy doing is traveling the country and watching clients realize their dreams of taking a small piece of property and turning it into something really special.
All right, welcome back. If you're driving somewhere, I highly recommend you slow down because this is going to be a good one, and you're going to want to listen to the whole thing. I'm going to continue with the CWD deep dive. I would tell you how much time I've spent on this topic, but I'm sort of embarrassed. If you saw my desk and table, you would believe me. I've got our guest on here. I'm super excited about this. I think you'll really enjoy this. When you watch CWD videos or read content online, or even in popular literature, your hunting magazines, it's almost like Groundhog Day. It's the same thing over and over again. And I'm really excited because this content is completely different. So if you didn't already, go back and listen to my podcast with Dr. Mike Miller, which we kicked off this CWD segment with, and it was recorded July 1st, 2022, for those of you looking for context. Mike was actually a true professional. Interviewed him the day after he retired, and he was certainly willing to give his historical and professional take on CWD. And honestly, I think Mike even gave us some personal feelings about CWD, which may not sound like a big deal, but it is. If you sit here where I am trying to bring guests on, so many of them avoid being recorded. Imagine that. So, one of Mike's expressed concerns about the topic of CWD was that certain misinformation surrounding CWD has been repeated over and over again to ultimately become fact. I relate to Mike in this regard because I also believe that even many professors, wildlife professionals, many of my colleagues, academics, state agency personnel, nonprofit organizations, as well as sportsmen and sportswomen continue to perpetuate nonsensical information about chronic wasting disease merely because they heard it from someone they believe to be knowledgeable on the subject matter. Sometimes that's Google. This, to be honest with you, is exactly what brings me to this podcast recording today. I was planning on doing more of a chronological CWD series, but I fast-tracked it to talk about this today. One of my favorite Mark Twain quotes is, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." You've heard me use my version of that saying on this podcast before, and it's never accurate, but you get the point. As a natural skeptic who's relentlessly inquisitive, I often ask myself if the things that I know to be fact are really factual. It's a fun argument, and you should have it with yourself too from time to time, to be honest with you. In a recent popular magazine article that I produced on chronic wasting disease, I mentioned what I thought to be a professional fact about chronic wasting disease. One that my peers and colleagues would accept for sure. Here's what I stated, and I'll let our guest today tell me if I was right or wrong, and maybe you guys can judge me yourselves after hearing what we talk about. I said in this article, CWD is contagious and can be transmitted orally from individual to individual through saliva, urine, and feces, though much more needs to be discovered about the various mechanisms of transmission. The truth is, none of my colleagues, former professors, not one single state agency, and certainly no nonprofit deer organization would ever bat an eye about my statement because they know that statement to be truthful and factual. If I'm being honest with myself, I regurgitated the words quite perfectly as I was taught. Does that make it factual? Absolutely not. As you can imagine, I receive a fair amount of calls and emails from folks who have something to say. The truth is, I enjoy it. But this particular gentleman asked me a question regarding that statement that just happens to be one of my favorite questions to ask others. He said, Jason, where's the science that proves there to be a transmittable dose of infectious CWD prions in a natural amount of urine that also proves that CWD is spread through urine? So I went back to the literature and reread the papers with this one goal in mind. And guess what? It was still fuzzy. It's not as concise as I once imagined it to be, so I did what I do, and I picked up the phone. That's why I diverted to the topic of piss. Why not seek the truth, I thought. I hate to lose and I hate to be wrong. But like some of you, sometimes I am wrong. I'm comfortable saying that I certainly don't know how to build bridges, but I have a firm grasp on fetal sex determination and cervids, how plants work with microbes to fix dirt, philosophical perspectives on managing deer and the population ecology of a K-selected species like whitetails, at least as presented to me by the great Dale McCullough's book and Dr. Steve Damaris. The reality is, unless you want to sound like my engineer buddies, at some point we all must assume that some things in life are true or factual, like the sky's blue, or you must stop on red, speed up on yellow, and go on green. Or the NFL has turned into a two-hand touch pansy organization, and, of course, that liberals, leftists, and progressives are destroying America. So today, I'm going to ask the simple question. Do we see shedding of infectious CWD prions in deer urine? And if we do, are those doses, or those natural doses, I should say, enough to infect other deer with CWD? In other words, are prions shed in urine? I think they are. It's probably quite clear from the research. But the question is, are they found in fatal doses in a natural environment? Perhaps more importantly, do commercially available urine-based scents and attractants, think Tink 69, perpetuate the spread of chronic wasting disease? If you listen to the fake experts, you'll go to hunt camp this year under the impression that there is, and I quote, strong and clear scientific evidence linking the spread of CWD to the use of natural deer urine products. That's a quote. I do not want you to get the feeling that I'm a lobbyist for the commercial urine industry, because I truly don't remember the last time I bought a bottle of Tink 69, although I've had great success with it. Who hasn't? I'm simply seeking the true science. On this show, I like to allow the real experts, scientists like Dr. Mike Miller and Dr. Davin Henderson, to set the record straight and report the real science. After all, these guys are doing the science. So with that, I've revealed it. Dr. Davin Henderson, hopefully you're still with me after all that.
Yeah, I am. Thanks.
Good deal. I don't normally write things down. If you couldn't tell, I did write that down because my brain is spinning after months of a deep dive in chronic wasting disease. It's actually frightening how much there is that has not been covered, that is misunderstood. And perhaps what's most frightening is how few true experts are afraid to talk about it on this type of platform. So first of all, thank you for coming on and sharing your knowledge. Those of you who have not heard of Dr. Davin Henderson, you just Google him. Here we go. Look at YouTube and listen to the guy. He clearly knows what he's talking about, in my opinion. So Davin, I'm going to let you give, instead of me butchering your bio and everything, go ahead and tell us who you are briefly, and then we'll just go ahead and get started.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it. I'm Davin Henderson. I was previously an assistant professor at Colorado State University in the Prion Research Center, where we did a lot of research attempting to understand how CWD is transmitted. I'm currently not affiliated with CSU anymore, but I'm a founder of CWD Evolution, which is the first commercially available RT quick test for CWD. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, sir. So the RT quick is one of the things that I've done. I've done a lot of reading on, and I'm, I guess, perhaps selfishly anxious to hear you educate us a little bit more about it. But I guess a couple of thoughts, and then I'll let you run with this, is, time brings us new technology in just about anything and everything. And that includes new testing and assay procedures. As a result, I think a lot of times scientists or whoever can observe new phenomena that were not possible. I mean, think about genetics and the advancement of that technology. So, now we can obviously assay deer, which assay is just another term for test, deer both antemortem or before death and postmortem after death. And we can also test the environment, at least I believe that to be true. So can you talk a little bit briefly about where I guess this podcast is going to cover CWD transmission, most notably in urine, in deer urine, and then also commercial, obviously, scent urine products, but also the testing. When you read the testing as even, I'm a wildlife biologist, but when I read the literature on the testing, it's pretty thick. I'm not going to lie to you, but only after a couple of months now I can kind of understand a little bit about it. So can you sort of talk about the testing and how that has evolved?
Sure. I think it's best to kind of take a couple steps back, kind of where I started at CSU, which is where the testing for CWD using RT Quick kind of really started. So I came to the lab about the time we were looking at this transmission issue between deer. And previous to my time there, there had been a couple studies done trying to understand if saliva, urine, feces, blood, or various other things could transmit CWD. And there's a very seminal paper, actually a science paper, which is amongst the highest, most renowned and famous journal there is in all of science, really. And a paper out of CSU was published there demonstrating that CWD can be transmitted in saliva and blood. And in that same paper, they did try to transmit to deer orally feces and urine at the same time. And in that study, none of the deer became sick with CWD. They fed them, copious amounts and kind of what amounts to a relatively disgusting amount of feces and urine over a short period of time, but daily for, hundreds of milliliters of urine and multiple tens of hundreds of grams of feces. And those deer did not get sick. And so the next part of that study was kind of looking at mice. And hopefully we get into this a little bit later, because a lot of the terms and we toss around ideas and words like infectivity actually in the prion world come from mouse studies, and those are through intracranial inoculations and not necessarily what would amount to a functional oral dose for any animal. So it was urine was passed, or CWD was passed through urine in intracranial inoculation in 2 mice out of 9 in a study that was done by my colleague Nick Haley, and that was about the time I was in the lab, and we were interested in trying to test for CWD in these in urine and saliva to determine which of these samples or which of these deer at which stage of disease were shedding CWD. So the RT Quick testing technology was new to me when I got to CSU, and it's really unbelievable. It's for those of you who are familiar with other biological assays, it's sort of like PCR for viruses and bacteria, but for proteins. Since prions are a protein-only disease, there's no genetic material. So instead of having to get rid of the normal PRP and detecting prions through harsh treatments, it actually amplifies prions to detectable levels, which makes it way more sensitive than any other test we've had for CWD, besides another similarly related test to RT Quick called PMCA. So those two technologies really advanced our understanding of where we could find prions. And however, I think they did manage to make the argument confusing about which tissues and fluids are actually dangerous to deer. So we did detect CWD using RT Quick in saliva and urine and feces. And today we've kind of tried to refine some of that into, quantify that into kind of like what we would assume would be an infectious dose. And I don't think there's much out there in the popular press on what that actually is. But I guess that's kind of the broad introduction to it. Can you kind of refine on where you like to go now?
I like it. Perfect. Just remember, you have to dumb this down for C students like me, Doc, because
Gotcha.
I had to play some hype music before this podcast to make sure I was on. So when you talk about Nick Haley's study, is that the 2009, November of 2009 paper with Haley, Mathiasen, and colleagues? Is that the paper?
I think so. There's a few with them on it, but I imagine that this is the one where
so can you
transmission of urine.
If you're talking to a group of high school kids or fifth graders, to the best, I know it's not your paper, but to the best of your knowledge, since that preceded your work, what was sort of the 30,000 foot view in a nutshell?
So the all these studies with mice aren't really does CWD transmit through saliva and urine, because you'd really only answer that question by giving him to a deer, right?
Yes,
but the mouse studies,
since you mentioned that, I'll just inject this right now. I had a CWD, what some would consider an expert, email me at one point, and it's just, I call it uncommon sense, not common sense anymore. But to me, the uncommon sense is that, obviously you have a model, kind of like human beings. We try to use monkeys and such to model, since we don't use humans for things. But to me, it just doesn't. It has never made sense to use a mouse, transgenic, I'm assuming in this case, to inoculate or inject in the brain of a mouse. So can you, I guess, touch on your feelings with that and why
Sure.
why do they do that?
Right. So I mean the main reason is cost, and also genetic background. So transgenic mice is on it's called a congenic background. It means their genes are pretty much the same. So if you have a treatment to one mouse and a treatment to the other mouse, they should have essentially the same response, because they're have the similar genetic background. So you can't really do that in animals that aren't laboratory animals. So there are no laboratory deer animals. So it's really difficult to do what was like a natural experiment in the field. And there's a long history of prions being analyzed through intracranial inoculations, and honestly, that type of test takes a long time. So we're talking a 500-day experiment to do just mice, and that's a long time to wait to get your results. And that's considered fast in animal research. So if you talk about deer and injecting deer, either intravenously or feeding them, something with prion is in it, you're talking about 2 years at a minimum if you give deer a very high dose, and 3 to 4 potentially if you're on the edge of the infectious dose. So cost is the major thing, and just reproducibility. The studies where you know that if there's enough prion in what you inject into a brain in a transgenic mice, it's going to amplify, or it's not, and it's not. There isn't there's very little biology at play there besides the transgenic line that you pick. And the samples that you give. Like for a deer, if you give an oral dose, there's always this potential issue that some of it may not actually be ingested in the same in one as it is in another, and various other things like that. So mice are just practical, and they're really when you talk about a mouse study, a deer study, at least at CSU, I think for one deer it was $150,000 to do a relatively short deer study for one deer. So you're talking 10 deer. It's $1.5 million to do a very small deer study.
Right. So when a lot of people, from my experience, and this is one of the causes of the confusion surrounding CWD, is even the quote unquote experts, and I can think of a couple right now who I've spoken to recently, read the title of the paper and then a portion of the abstract, and they automatically assume. So in Nick Haley's paper, obviously he's using mice, correct? No white-tailed deer or mule deer, for that matter, are involved in the paper. Now they're orally, they're also orally exposing them to urine and feces. Am I right? From CWD positive deer?
No, that's actually not right.
Okay.
Those mice actually aren't susceptible orally. because the gene that expresses the transgene to make them, express the deer prion protein is actually really only expressed in the brain. So those mice don't really have an oral route for exposure. There are new mice that do have an oral route, and I haven't seen many papers with them just because the studies take so long. I don't think any of them were particularly successful. But anyway, yes, this study was specifically intracranial inoculation of saliva, straight saliva, so 30 microliters of saliva, and 2 milliliters of deer urine that was concentrated by lyophilization, so made into like powder, and then resuspended, and then that like smaller volume of 20 to 30 microliters was inoculated into the brain of the mouse.
By inoculated, what's another term?
So it was put into the brain of a mouse with a needle.
Injected?
Injected, yeah.
Okay. So that's real natural. This all
Exactly.
sounds natural. Okay, so we'll move on then to your work, which I think was 15, 14, at least publication.
Right. Yeah. So that's about where we started and finished up. And I think we just had the last paper came out in 2020 that I was on from CSU.
Right. So did you change the game then and go to the actual whitetail?
Well, no. So I'm a biochemist, so I focus mainly on just testing. So Nick's study, as with my studies, we're not really a does it question. Does urine and saliva pass CWD prions? It was more is it there? Can it? So he just found that less than 50% of the mice died after inoculating concentrated and injecting concentrated urine into the brain. And I found that there were a handful. I think 7 total. And only 4 that were robustly positive urine samples out of over 100 samples from whitetail deer throughout the disease course had detectable CWD prions. So we're talking about less than 1 or 2 samples per deer through the infection cycle of CWD were CWD positive by RT-Quick.
Okay.
So that's the fundamental scientific evidence that there is CWD in deer urine. We went on to try to quantify that, and I could go into that if you'd like, about the volumes of urine and how much we think, and it might actually spread.
Yeah. I think that's kind of that's one of my major talking points here is, so we've proven that it's there, right? So
yes, it's there.
So
Yep.
The skeptic or the academic or layman, whoever who reads that says, well, listen, Davin, Jason, whoever, it's present, right? I don't care how much is there, it's present. Present or not, that means it can infect other animals with CWD. Then you're saying, nope, hold on a minute. That may not be the case.
So this type of thing where even like the smallest amount of CWD is infectious to deer is just not right. I mean, obviously infected deer at CSU with urine and feces from CWD positive deer that clearly had CWD, and they didn't get sick. So we know that there is a sub-infectious dose of CWD, and that's something I don't think is really well understood, that, you can get a sub-infectious dose of any disease, including CWD. So we did 2 studies. One was a quantitative assessment of CWD prions in urine, saliva, and then also some tissues. We just wanted to know how much was there, and put it in terms of lethal doses. So if you had a lethal dose of urine, what would that be? And this paper also gets really confused because it's also relating lethal doses, not of deer, which people automatically assume that we're talking about lethal doses of a deer. Yes. But no one actually knows what a lethal dose of a deer is, even for, brain. So that's still totally unknown. So when we talk about lethal doses in the scientific literature, what we're talking about is a 50% lethal dose of injecting into a mouse brain. The same, going back to the same type of study, because those are the only numbers we have. We have to work with we can't work with the unknown amount with deer. So if we want to put it in terms of infectious doses, we have to use, a 50% lethal dose of injecting into the brain of a mouse. So we found that, between 2 and 5 milliliters of urine was a lethal dose for a mouse. And that actually coincided with Nick's paper pretty well, because he took 2 milliliters and concentrated that down and found that 2 of 9 got infected. And we said, from our quantitative assessment, kind of determining how much was there in the urine compared to in, the brain, that was inoculated into those mice, we equated it to be about 2 to 5 milliliters. So I think that was a pretty good amount, but people automatically assumed that is the amount that would infect a deer. So that has, nothing to do with deer, unfortunately. I wish it did. We don't know that 50% lethal dose for a deer, especially from an oral inoculation. So anyway, the next study we did looked at, the most positive urine samples we had. So remember, we tested hundreds and we only found a few positives. So we're not talking about, the average urine from a CWD positive deer. We're talking about the worst case scenario from a deer throughout the disease course. And we took those numbers and we quantified that and we compared that to saliva. And we found out that, urine and feces were about tenfold less than saliva. So the worst case urine scenario was about tenfold less than saliva. And we know from other actual deer studies that we were able to inoculate deer, like in the first study I talked about, with 50 milliliters of saliva. So that's about an ounce. And so if urine's tenfold less infectious than that, that's 500 milliliters, which is about 16 ounces. And then another study later on, probably 15 years later, we actually were able to infect deer with 30 milliliters of saliva. And so that's about 300 milliliters of deer urine if it's tenfold less, which is about 10 ounces. So that's where we came up with the 10 to 16 ounces of urine that it would take to orally inoculate a deer if we could find urine from like the most positive stage of disease and give that to a deer.
Okay, so the disease, meaning CWD, has sort of this disease progression, whereas in the early, I think maybe I should say that one of the hallmarks, I believe we talked about this with Dr. Miller, of any TSC, I believe, especially CWD, is that it can have this tremendously long incubation period. Am I right? So I've heard people say up to 2 years, up to 5 years, up to 10 years, whatever. We don't know. But essentially, there's a long incubation period, meaning you're infected today, but you may not show signs or symptoms until 2-3 years later. And that's, I think, what has a lot of people so panicked about.
Right.
But what you're saying in your study is you are taking urine from critters that have already progressed along that continuum, and they're essentially near death. Am I correct?
Well, that was one of the things that was a little bit strange about that paper, is we did find positive samples at the end of the disease course. So the animals that we were testing in that study were fed a very large amount of brain, so they had a very short disease period. So I think the deer. So the more CW you give a deer, the faster the disease progresses. That's what we found at CSU. So
that makes sense. But whitetails are not, or mule deer are not out there consuming massive amounts of brain matter from other white-tailed deer.
Right. So exactly. So the disease. In that study, we found a handful of deer urine samples that were positive and quantified them, and we found some at the end of disease and some at like 9 months out of 18 or something like that. So about halfway through. I think one of them was found that early. And then in an unpublished study, actually, just recently, where deer were inoculated with the 30 milliliters of saliva and the 300 nanograms of brain, which is what we equated that 300 or 30 milliliters of saliva, ounce of saliva was about equivalent to 300 nanograms of brain, which is an extraordinarily small amount of brain. It's like a nanogram is a millionth of a gram. So 300 of those is imperceptibly small. So those deer had a 30 to 36 month long disease course, and all of the urine from those deer was also tested in the same lab using RT quick assay, and only 2 out of those hundreds and hundreds of samples were found positive. So that tells me that under more natural infectious conditions, like smaller amounts of brain or using saliva to infect a deer like it might happen in the wild, the deer that are naturally infected would shed even less than we found in those original deer that were fed larger amounts of brain.
Mm-hmm. So over the years, I've heard a couple of different reports. I just wanted to have you set the record straight here. I'm digging through my notes because I have so much stuff on this, but I have heard people say that a white-tailed deer would essentially have to consume 33 gallons, or there's just as much, the equivalent of 1 gram of brain part. Do you have anything that you can put into perspective? I know you just did. You covered a couple of really good ones, but
no, I actually did that calculation. So the question was how if you had urine, CWD with urine, with the levels that we know that we detected based on RT-Quick, and we had 1 gram of brain, how much urine would that be equal to? So that was back when we had about 7 or 8 years ago, when the infectious dose we assumed was between 10 micrograms and 100 micrograms, which is a hundredth of a gram or so. And so that calculation was 1 gram of brain would equal 33,000 gallons of urine.
Yep.
That tells you two things. First of all, there's a lot of infectious doses in a gram of brain, and also that urine is very little prions compared to brain. So it kind of puts it into perspective. Like, if a brain weighs, half a kilogram or, 500 grams or something, or trying to think of normal weight, half a pound, maybe a pound. I'm not sure how much a deer brain weighs actually, but, there's, I don't even know, billions of infectious doses in that brain. And in the carcass, there are tons and tons and tons of doses of CWD. So when a deer dies in the woods, that creates a, environmental disaster for that area. There's that could be spread through the environment by critters and just decomposition and all sorts of natural things. But the new calculation. So if we look at this was actually recently, that number was used in a white paper given to the Pennsylvania Game Commission, and they used that 33,000 gallons of urine, and then they used the more recent number of 300 nanograms of brain. So they took they used old data and combined it with new data to come up with a new infectious dose, which is not true. So you have to you have to calculate using the same amount of urine with the new infectious dose.
Just follow the science, Davin. Just follow the science. Don't ask.
I did the calculations, so
it's
I know how to
data,
do it.
and they're got it.
So anyway, the new calculation is like 250,000 gallons of urine in a gram of brain if 300 nanograms is an infectious dose. Okay. So the amount of CWD in deer urine is really low, like to the point where it's barely detectable.
So great segue to my next. Let's move on, because there's people like me out there who are getting antsy. State agencies, as you are very well aware, across the country have been targeting urine bans, and obviously a lot of these are based on fear and politics and panic and sort of science. Do you believe that? Do you believe in I think it's probably an obviously dumb question at this point, in deer urine bans?
It's not a worthwhile thing to be doing for helping the spread of CWD. So, for a variety of reasons. The first reason is that the science does not point to deer urine in any way, shape, or form as a major vector for the spread of CWD. And if there's a scientist in the country that could argue that against me, I would be happy to entertain that, because there's just no data that suggests that a meaningful amount of urine that a deer would be exposed to and under any natural circumstances would be enough to get it infected. The second thing is the deer urine industry has been concerned about this, since at least 2015. And they made some major improvements to the biosecurity of the farms where they source the deer urine from. So the USDA has a program that deer farms can enroll into, to make them more biosecure. The deer urine industry also took another level of biosecurity on top of that, and asked some, disease experts, CWD experts, like wildlife biologists like you and scientists like me, and they came up with this program. So how can we keep these farms? How can we keep CWD out? And the number one thing they said was, don't let more deer in. So they're closed herds. They don't import any deer. So therefore that's the main way that CWD gets introduced into deer farms, and that's actually perfectly allowed in the USDA program, moving deer around.
Yeah. So the USDA has their CWD. It's a voluntary herd cert program, right?
That's right.
Okay. And then the Responsible Hunting Scent Association, is that the organization you were just talking about?
That's correct.
It has the deer protection program, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're involved in that with CWD Evolution, which is your firm.
Right.
Is that right?
So I started my company in order to do things that I wasn't able to do at CSU, like practically, like use this RT quick testing practically in the real world. So I want to develop a live animal test for CWD, which I'm currently working on with a company called VMRD up in Washington State. to bring that through USDA certification process, the approval process, and also to test the deer urine products to make sure that they were safe for wildlife.
So I'm going to interrupt you. I get yelled at by
Yeah.
my listeners for interrupting my guests, but in all fairness, again, I don't want people to think I'm fighting or lobbying for anyone. I'm just trying to figure out if I was ultimately correct or wrong in my article. You left the university setting as an academic to venture into an entrepreneurial company of your own.
Yeah.
So that because you felt like you wanted more options, you felt like your hands were tied under the academic umbrella. Is that accurate?
Right. There was little interest in applying the RT Quick technology at CSU because they didn't own the patent for the use.
So who owns the patent for RT Quick and who developed it?
That patent is currently expired for CWD just this last August, and it was held by Claudio Soto and the University of Texas Southwestern. They developed PMCA, and one of the claims in that patent is overlapping with the RT Quick. It's essentially any test that amplifies prions with CWD prions is covered under that patent. So I licensed that patent throughout its usage with my company to be able to do this deer urine testing, which was something the CSU was not willing to do. For just, I think there was issues of liability and there were issues of what we're not really gaining anything out of this. We're not paying to license patents. We get paid to license patents. It's kind of the opposite.
So in all fairness, I've been in the private sector since I left college, and I wouldn't want it any other way. But to my knowledge, a lot of times when folks leave the academic world to venture into a private setting and make money, they take a lot of heat. Do you run into situations where people say, hey, this is not independent, you're making money, you are, I guess I should say, you're also a consultant, right? Or you represent some of the scent companies, et cetera. Now, I would inject and say, hold on a minute. If you look at the guy's research, it's mind-blowing. I mean, you have, it's not anything that we can't, those of us reading it can't do it, but you have to really spend time digesting it. And as you said, you're a biochemist and I'm not. So do you run into that issue often? And you've already kind of addressed it in that and I would agree with you, in the private sector, you're free to do whatever you want to do. I have a couple of friends who were in the academics world, and once they left, it's amazing that they are able to get so much more done for the cause than when they were under the red tape, the limitations, all the wasted time and bullshit. So how do you address that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a lot cheaper to do research in a non-academic lab. I mean, the only thing that really weighs on it is how much does it cost to do, versus university has so many layers of bureaucracy to cover that it becomes ridiculous. So yeah, I mean, I have run into the how legitimate is the test for CWD, and the major call is it's unregulated. It's exactly because there is no regulation agency. Right. If I could be regulated by somebody and pass some sort of accreditation or anything, of course I would. We're working towards USDA approval for rectal biopsy tests for live animal testing for deer, and RT Quick testing on that, and RT Quick testing for postmortem. But urine is not on that list because the USDA only cares about what's a good sample to test an individual deer. And if you want to tell if a deer has CWD, the urine is probably the worst thing you could look at. Feces is in the most recent paper can get 60% of the postmortem positives, where a rectal biopsy can get 85 to 90% of the postmortem positives, which is a good live animal test. Urine is much worse than that, obviously, than even feces. So it's just not a good live animal test. So there will be no regulated deer urine test through the USDA, and there is no other regulatory agency to go through. Having the independence of working on your own, allows you to do a lot of things. You could set, research goals, you could set commercial goals, and kind of work in a lot of different directions. And the main reason I did it is this test works so well. It's such a good test and can bring so many new things to the CWD research world and CWD combating world, that I had to do something to move that forward, and it wasn't happening in the academic setting.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. I figured I'd get that out of the way because I know there's going to be some people. Like I said, I'm in the middle, trying to remain objective and seek out the science. So, fair enough. All right. Wow. That was a lot of science in a hurry, but I promise the listener at this point it gets, as my good friend Rick Haney says, much funner, because this is where we go to some of the more, I guess I mentioned the states, I believe, and don't email, because I've got a couple numbers, but I think there's something like 13 states now that have a ban on deer urine, 5 states, revisited and then reversed. And I think there's 3 of them that are basically saying, hey, this deer protection program that you had just mentioned through the Responsible Hunting Scent Association is fair. That's good, but you must follow that. And then I think, there's, what's that leave, 26 states or whatever that allow deer urine currently. The state of Pennsylvania, which just happens to be my home state for now, just went through a series of meetings with the commissioners, the 8 individuals on the board who are, no one ever really knows what to call them, so they call them commissioners. They are not elected by we the people. They are elected by or chosen by the governor of the state. So this meeting went on, and I was not there, but it is on YouTube for anybody who wants to watch it. YouTube's audio or the camera, I don't know who filmed it. Thankful they did, but some of the audio is not the greatest. So if you can't hear it, I'm going to try to do some post-recording, editing, and make it so that you can at least hear it and level it at least some point. You may have to jack it up in the pickup or on your phone or whatever you're listening to. But before I get into that, I want to read this to you, Davin, and you tell me, perhaps out of context, I don't know, but I recently read an Outdoor News on the 28th of September, written by Ron Steffi, and it was interesting because he says that the Pennsylvania Game Commission's stance on deer urine, CWD, is baffling, and this was obviously right after the meeting there that they had in Harrisburg. In this, I won't mention the individual's name because he is a great guy, and I'm not inferring he's right or wrong. But I was curious when I read it. I thought, oh man, I don't know about that. And he actually was a former graduate student / boss of mine when I was an undergrad. I was a technician, and as a side note, my first job as that technician position was to put on what was supposed to be a new tick-proof suit, go sit in the woods for a period of time and see if I got any ticks. And looking back, I can't believe what a dumbass I was, because I went out as a freshman in college and did that. So the comment is, in quote, CWD is highly transmissible to deer through saliva, feces, urine, and a contaminated environment. Another quote is, would you say that's true or false? Or somewhere gray? CWD is highly transmissible to deer through saliva, feces, and urine.
The use of the word highly
has included, yeah.
It's not technical in any way. So there was a study that showed that you could transfer bedding, water buckets, feed buckets from one suite to another suite, and those deer got sick. But that was not immediately. They got sick months and months and months and months and months of doing that later. And that includes the water buckets. Honestly, that doesn't, you don't know if it was the urine, the feces, or the saliva. And in that case, my money's on the saliva, because that's the only thing we've ever really been able to transmit disease with in the deer studies.
Absolutely. Fair enough. And then the other comment is, and some of this is taken out of context, could be, I should say, which is what burns me up most about this, and it's why this topic is so frustrating, but it says, in quotes, the amount of positive material needed to infect 100% of the time is the size of a very fine grain of sand. Now,
Right, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of odd, taken out of context, but the very brief article is this author saying, hey, I can't believe the Game Commission did this. What a bunch of idiots. They tied 4-4 and killed this deer urine ban. So he's included it under that sort of topic subject. I'm not so sure if this is a state. This individual is now a deer program coordinator for a state, but I don't know what you thought about that comment or not, but
So I could make an analogy pretty easily to that. So the size of a grain of sand, if it's brain material, I don't know how big a grain of sand is, but there's a very small amount of brain material that it takes to infect a deer orally. And we did our best science to determine how much saliva that is, and it's 30 milliliters of saliva. And our best science says that urine's tenfold less infectious than saliva. So that's 300 milliliters of urine. It's like looking at, lead. Like if you have lead powder in your lab, that's 100% lead. So that's 100%. But if you're looking in water, there's a extremely small amount of lead in most water supplies you don't have to worry about it because it's not even of any health risk. But you could just because you can detect it doesn't mean that it's an infectious or dangerous amount. I guess.
Yeah, this author continues to go on and say, I don't understand how these 4 commissioners could vote against the proposal. You're about to hear that. That provides a safeguard against sickening and eventually killing deer or elk in our state. So he's inferring that urine naturally, obviously I'm throwing Tink 69, not because they sponsor us, but because that's when I was in high school, I probably used gallons of the stuff because it was fun and it worked. But here's one for you. I'm assuming maybe I'm just looking for it, but I'm also.
Let me go back to that. Can I go back to the article real quick?
Go ahead.
So they're also said that there's, it's well known, or it's widely known that there's CWD in commercial deer urine products, and that's 100% false. All of the suppliers for the deer manufacturer urine industry, all of those farms have never had a CWD positive case, and all of the urine has been tested by me using RT Quick, and also it's negative. So it's never been shown to be in a deer urine product in any study. So I don't know
you're reading the same article I'm reading?
Absolutely, yeah.
Can't get much past you, huh?
No, not usually.
Yeah, I see that in here now. It does. I kind of skipped over that, but he does. Yeah, interesting. And I'm also skeptical. This is his sentence. What's his name? Ron Steffi. I don't know him. I'm also skeptical. But my point is, this is the stuff people are reading, right? In the outdoor news, people are reading this, and this is what they're taking as fact. So this is them following the science. And he says, I'm also skeptical of claims made by any company whose main purpose is to make money rather than protect deer and elk. And I kind of, to me, that's a typical. I won't get into politics, but I could class. I guarantee you, the guy drives an electric vehicle or a Subaru just based off that comment. So what you're saying is you're bastardizing or making the fact that people make money a very, very, very bad thing. So I'm hoping he's not sitting on his iPhone, which was created by one of the most famous entrepreneurs of all time, who's now deceased. I hope he's not sitting in his office right now looking at Facebook or Insta Snap, whatever the hell it is, right? So this stuff cracks me up. I mean, these are the people who are passing information around. And this is going to get worse, Davin. You're going to like this. And I know you sat in those meetings with the Pennsylvania Game Commission. And this is where I'm going to say this. Listen, if anybody wants to watch this, I do not subscribe. I started watching the Pennsylvania Game Commission's YouTube channel. I know I'm going to get texts and emails. I'm not on YouTube regularly. I do not approve of their behaviors. But I watched both recordings. I think it was September 23rd and 24th, if I'm not mistaken. The one that you want to watch is September 24th from about 34. No, I'm sorry. I'll dig that number up. 26 minutes into it to 41 minutes and 34 seconds. Not that I recorded it, but if you're like me and you don't want to watch garbage and you want to truncate it down, go to 26 minutes on the September 24th meetings. I was told that Davin gave, I guess testimony would be the right, not a presentation, but testimony at that meeting. So I watched both of these. Time I'll never get back in my life. Could have been pitching with my daughter or, hell, walking the dog, anything. And I did not find it. I was also told that there was public comment, and I did not find it. So the fact that they chose not to air that, but they did then air, and I'm not inferring anything, I'm just reporting the facts, they did show Game Commission employees of different divisions and branches giving their updates on certain things like DMAP and timber stand management, etc. But they pulled Davin and other public comments out of it. I'll let you take that information and do what you want with it. If you find it, please email me, jason@droptinewildlife.com. I would love to watch it. So, yeah, that's good stuff. Davin, you were there, correct?
I was, yeah.
Okay, I know we've been going on a long time, but this is something that I really want to cover. So I'm gonna play some of this stuff. This was sort of the start of the meeting. If you can't hear it, at some point the volume does turn up. I'm not gonna play the whole meeting, don't worry. I spent a couple hours cutting and splicing earlier, but this is essentially I call it the voiceover. I don't know the individual, I apologize, who is introducing this legislation that they then discuss. So here we go.
Agenda is on page 7, also out of the Bureau of Wildlife Management. To more effectively safeguard the wildlife resources of the Commonwealth, the Commission is proposing to amend Section 137.35 to further reduce the risk of spreading CWD through the use of attractants by restricting their use. Research has well established that CWD prions, the infectious agent of CWD, are shed in urine, feces, and saliva of infected animals, and that the presence of infectious prions in excreta play a role in the direct and indirect transmission of CWD. Deer readily use natural and artificial scrape sites where they can be exposed to CWD prions from the urine and saliva of a CWD positive animal. Any attractant or circumstance that creates the components of a scrape, whether natural or artificial, increase risk of disease transmission. Natural urine attractants are produced by captive cervid farms and often contain other biofluids. The production, manufacturing, and sale of urine attractants is not regulated. Therefore, there is no regulatory requirement or independent authority to test for presence of CWD prions in urine attractants. There is no record of facilities that produce urine attractants, and there is no traceability of these products. Even herds that are enrolled in state and federal herd certification programs, the most robust CWD surveillance programs for cervid facilities, have tested positive for CWD. CWD is a threat to deer and elk in Pennsylvania. CWD prion's introduction to a novel area in Pennsylvania, or CWD spread, regardless of source, causes substantial impacts to wildlife, stakeholders, and the agency. Much is still unknown about CWD, so limiting exposure of all species to a known pathogen is essential. Therefore, the Commission recommends amending the use of attractants in outdoor settings. The amendments to Section 137.35 will not take effect until the 2023-2024 license year. The amendments can be found on pages 7 and 8 of your agendas.
All right, so I apologize again if you can't hear that. Just Board of Game Commissioners meeting September 24th, 2022. Go to 26 minutes into that, and that's exactly where that is. You can hear it. Davin, I don't know. That was I just wanted to sort of frame it up. Is there anything there that was causing you yet to crawl out of your skin?
Well, I mean, the idea that, so if you go back to like the studies we were doing with saliva and urine, we pretty robustly showed that saliva is, a likely transmitter of CWD, but it's a fairly large amount. And there's some studies that came out of Texas, or maybe not studies, but incidences where, deer shared a fence line, and that's the only thing that was in common between them, which spread CWD. So we're pretty sure that that's one way CWD is spread. another way is, can you contaminate the environment to the point with urine and feces so then in one area that area is the environment would be dangerous for a deer to encounter because it has enough CWD to get a deer sick. So that's kind of where we thought about urine and feces fitting in, was this environmental reservoir. And we're not talking about, a bottle of tanks, 1 ounce or 3 ounces or whatever. We're talking about, liters and liters of urine and lots of feces being shed onto that environment through a herd of deer that had CWD, at a fairly high prevalence through a very, a lengthy period of time. So that's the way we thought about maybe the transmission risks of urine and feces. Now, using it in this context, and then taking out of context the amounts and the way the products are used, it just doesn't. It never made any sense to me, even before I was paid by these guys. They to be a consultant and talk to people about the science. They called me up in my office at CSU and told me that the states are banning deer urine and asked me, your paper was cited for this ban. Like, do you think our products could spread CWD? And I asked them more about it because I didn't really know too much about how urine is used. And I'm like, no, that's not what we were talking about in the paper. That's not, the mechanism by which we think CWD could be spread through urine. So it's just, the whole thing never really made sense to me. And there's been a lot of people, like you said, taking a couple words out of an abstract here and, a couple words out of this abstract there. And all of a sudden you got urine as, the main way CWD is spreading around the country. It's just not true.
Yeah. Oh, and it gets better from there. So just to give those who don't want to go watch it a sense of what it must have been like to be in the room. Again, these are your commissioners. There are 8 of them. Is it 8? I think there's 8. But maybe 9. I don't know. I can't recall.
There was 9. There's 9. One of them was an attending.
Yeah, that's right. One of them was actually hunting out west. That's the smartest one of all. He well, of course, I don't know how he would have voted, but yeah. Anyway, so this one here, one of the commissioners, Stanley Knick Jr., made this comment.
Discussion on the motion. Mr. President, Mr. Chair, I have a couple comments. This is a difficult decision. Based on scientific information, there's no doubt in my mind that urine proposes a risk of spreading CWD. However, how much of a risk is a difficult question. The industry has testing program. However, the testing program is not done by an independent agency and raises real concerns to me. That's all I have on that.
Davin?
Yeah.
Again, I should probably say this. I did my best. I don't know any of these folks. I did my best. I think I have the names and everything right. I tried to piece this puzzle together, but Commissioner Knick, based on scientific information, he said there's no doubt in his mind. I'm just curious, is he reading different science than what we are?
Well, in fact, he was. So the presentation to the Game Commission by the wildlife biologist that they have on staff contained numerous bastardizations of the scientific record, taking data from one paper and then combining it with data from another paper and then making some inference that wasn't valid based on combining things from 2 different studies. This is very common in that the wildlife biologists dealing with this issue have lots and lots of things on their plates. They have to deal with all kinds of different animals, and so when they're tasked to do these projects, they're just not prepared to do a deep dive into the science. This is all I do. I live and breathe CWD, and unfortunately CWD and deer urine too. So no one's going to out information me on this.
Yeah.
I've found all the information there is, and I've looked at it for years, and it hasn't changed because there's no new research being done on deer urine. There's no lab in the country that's going to try to infect deer with deer urine because it's first of all, it probably wouldn't work, and you can't risk $1 million experiment on something that's probably not going to work. It's just the science. Unfortunately, what little we have, which I think is the best we could do with what we had. I think it's pretty illustrative of the idea that deer urine at small volumes is not a vector for the transmission, is not a way that CWD transmits. It's just not. It's not the most likely case.
The inferences really piss me off. and the fact that, and listen, I've been asking people, show me the science. I've been emailing people, who make these definitive comments. I just want to see the science because I'm a consultant. I'm a private consultant, and I certainly can't cover every niche like you. There's so many experts I rely on, but my job is to educate myself. I'm an educator, not a public school educator, thank God, but I'm an educator. And I need to know what I'm talking about. But like I said, I make mistakes like everybody else. What amazed me most during the COVID situation over the last couple of years is how easy it is to convince human beings of something. Right? Especially when they're ignorant, they are prey species, in my opinion. We're going to follow the science. I remember one of he wasn't a colleague. He was actually an Alabama biologist, called me up. He said, you like this comment? And this is when the whole follow the science started, right? Well, here we are, scientists. He said, were we ever taught to follow the science? He said, weren't we taught to question the science? I said, yeah, this is the very basic principle of the scientific process, right?
That's right.
Interesting how though I didn't see the data or the they mentioned white papers, they mentioned all these things. None of us get to see that. None of us get to hear you talk. None of us get to hear the biologist talk. It's what they want us to hear. I've had people say, "No, Jay, they're not politicians. The politician is the governor, and he just chooses." Whether good old boy, good old girl, I don't know, but he chooses people. I mean, one of them's an orthopedic surgeon. I'll be honest with you. He's probably really good at cutting into my knee or whatever tendons and et cetera he needs to cut into. But when you hear this guy talk, I would love 5 minutes with him because he's way, way out of bounds and out of his league on this topic. So moving on, because we have to, Commissioner Dennis Fredericks, I believe. Let me back up. That last gentleman voted no, not to advance it. This next gentleman, Dennis Fredericks, voted yes. Note things like resource first. How much CWD research did he read? I have question marks because it's curious to me. And then I'm trying to read my chicken scratch. Oh, the recommendation came from these scientists in the Bureau of Wildlife Management. I thought to myself, wow, what are these guys who are my colleagues and gals, my colleagues, reading that they recommended to Commissioner Dennis Fredericks, hey, we need to follow the science. Here it is.
Mr. President, if I may.
Certainly.
I appreciate everybody's diversified view on this issue. And like Commissioner Knick said, this is one of those tough decisions that we have to make. And I've been around a while, and I have learned that when it comes to these tough decisions, you fall back on your base. And my base, and I'm extremely confident that everybody sitting up at this table's base, is resource first. I appreciate everybody's concern over the industry, our hunters, but again, it gets serious when a recommendation this controversial comes from our scientists and the Bureau of Wildlife Management. They have a really good reason to move this forward. I'm not capable of understanding completely what that is, but I trust them. And in the interest of putting the resource first and acting as a science-based organization, I have to, as one commissioner, put my trust in the Bureau of Wildlife Management. And with that, I would like to remind everybody that this is simply a proposal. This isn't final adoption. This is a proposal that will allow the process to take place, for it to be published in the bulletin, for the public to comment, and all the interested parties that are here today and who are not here today to participate in that process and work with us. And it won't be finally adopted, possibly until January. It might not be adopted finally in January. We just have to see what kind of progress we make. And as one commissioner, I'm going to hang my hat on the Bureau of Wildlife Management and their recommendations.
He's hanging his hat. So he's going to fall back on his base. I have to question him. Did you listen to the experts? What are you listening to? And I guess you mentioned that there was some other data, some other white paper, and we're not privy to that. This is very common for the way politicians abuse science. And if you go back to the COVID analogy, my gosh, this is going to go down as one of the greatest hoaxes of all time, and they can cancel me for saying that. The people who listen to this guy talk, I love how he closes with the monkey's paw, right? These people are great salespeople. The monkey's paw, he's going to extend an olive branch, and he's going to say, you know what, folks, don't worry. This doesn't mean that there's going to be a ban tomorrow. This just means that we're going to float it out there in the game news and give people a chance to talk and tell us what their opinions are. Are these the same people who spoke at your meeting that you cut off and didn't air on your YouTube channel, and you're going to give us a chance to talk? I don't know if Commissioner Dennis Fredericks has good intentions or bad. It's really not my position to assume. But the end of that really pissed me off when he said, "Don't worry, this isn't going to be adopted until January." No, what this is it's a slippery slope. It's giving you some a leg hold and foot. I'm still not convinced. And again, I'm the guy who put in the internationally published popular magazine article that infectious prions are found in urine and that in fact can infect other animals. And I'm the one saying, hey, wait a minute, we still don't know if I'm right. I have not heard any good scientific evidence. I'll move on to one of the females. I hope I don't butcher this gal's name. Commissioner Kristen Schnepp-Geiger. She's at 29 minutes and 4 seconds if anybody wants to hear this. But again, everybody in this room accepts that. When I hear these things, it concerns me and it makes me wonder what they've been listening to.
I'll follow up on the heels of Commissioner Kinnick. The science is there, right, that prions exist in urine, feces, and saliva. Everybody in this room accepts that. What we're looking at is a possibility versus a probability scenario. And, at the end of the day, everybody in this room has the same end goal. Nobody likes CWD, and we would all like for it to go away. But the reality is we don't live in a rainbows and unicorns world, and we don't have that magic wand right now to make that happen. So when you flesh this out and try to make it less complicated than what it is right now, I got to thinking about some of the traveling that I've done out west, and driving across I-80 in Wyoming, in October, November, when weather is extremely unpredictable. Somewhere there's a highway department manager that's looking at the radar and hearing from his staff saying, hey, there's a winter storm coming and this is bad. Like, this is really bad. What do you want to do? And he sits back and he looks and he says, take the speed limit and drop it from 80 down to 70. And he watches and he gathers intelligence. And he says, all right, take it down to 65, take it down to 55, take it down to 45. And that's kind of what we're doing with our DMAs as we're getting intelligence about CWD and how to manage it most effectively. Is we have DMAs, we have import bans, we have all sorts of regulation in place. We're lowering that speed limit right now. And we're faced with the decision today of, do we close that highway down and tell the motorists, get off the highway, it's too dangerous? Or do we let them proceed with caution? And where I'm at right now, I'm still watching that storm, but I'm not ready to drop the hammer and close the highway. That's not to say that there won't be more science that comes tomorrow, next week, or next year that'll change that decision. But in my opinion, it's not there right now.
Thank you. Anybody else?
And Commissioner Kristen Schnepp-Geiger, I hope I'm not butchering that, voted no, not to advance the proposal. I love her deduction Not sure I follow the analogy completely, but that's probably just because I'm a poor student. But at least there was some deduction there and a thought process of, hey, we probably are missing a lot of pieces of the puzzle. Any comments on those last two, Davin, just to make sure you're awake?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I'm still. I was at the meeting. It's not quite that bad. So, they got information from their scientists that wasn't accurate, and I don't know how it happened, but what it seems like to me is someone went to this biologist at the Bureau of Land Management and said, "Go find me evidence for a deer urine ban." And it's like, or find me the evidence, find me the science, for this deer urine ban, because that's the goal. The goal is to, is anti-deer farm. It's anything that comes from deer farms got to be dangerous kind of logic. And that's a lot of people have that. And, everyone can have their own opinion about deer farms. I personally don't really think they're the best thing for wildlife. But, if we're going to do everything we can to make them safe, I'm going to, develop a live animal test to make sure that, those deer farms are making the wildlife safe. But in any case, I think a lot of these have the way it's brought up is politically motivated in the first place. And so you're only really going to get research that backfills that opinion. You're not going to get a opposition. You're not going to get anyone trying to really find the facts. You're going to have someone just, give you what you want. Yeah.
I'm gonna play Commissioner Scott Four-Doors now. He voted yes. He's at 33 minutes, 55 seconds into it, if you want to hear this. There's not a whole lot of, I'll just play this one for you.
Yes, Dr. Mitrick, this is Scott. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, echo everybody's comments. It's a tough decision. I hearken back to your question a couple meetings ago that we do ban this in the DMAs where CWD's at, yet we don't ban it in the areas where it isn't. So, that I've reflected on those comments as well as, the recommendations and the hard work that Bureau of Wildlife Management did. And as Commissioner Frederick said, this is a process. So, I'm supportive of moving it forward today and let the public comment on it. So thank you.
I suppose all these folks are in a position politically that they have to stroke the Bureau of Wildlife Management. I don't know. Seems to me like a conflict of interest, but he brings up the ban in CWD positive DMAs versus where CWD is not. Any input on that?
Yeah, I think the rationale behind the ban in the zones was that if you're adding deer urine into the environment, it's a potential congregation site where you're going to get more deer and nosing around the same area. I'm not a deer biologist. I don't pretend to know how deer urine affects a deer in the field or whatnot. But if you're adding urine to the field, it seems like you're just adding another point. Like you're actually decreasing the number or increasing the number of potential sites for them to visit, therefore diluting the amount of deer congregating. And from what I've been told, deer urine doesn't really congregate deer. It's more of like they kind of look in that direction and maybe hang out a little bit longer or maybe walk towards it a little bit. It's not like a food plot or a salt lick where you're really getting deer visiting it every day and, exchanging saliva on the surface and whatnot. That type of thing I think could be dangerous, but, that's the right rationale in the zones. And that was a little bit of the rationale for the ban outright as well. It's like, if it's another thing, if it's not enough to, if it's not enough to spread it on itself, maybe the use of the product is therefore dangerous because it congregates deer or something. So that's another argument that I've heard against the ban, but it doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know. You can come up with your own logic on that one.
Fair enough. Here's where it gets fun. So Commissioner Mike Mitrick, let's see, this is at 34-42, I believe. This is fun.
Then. First of all, I was the person who requested the white paper on the use of urine attractants. This was in response to a request by a producer of urine attractants who wanted to know if we would consider allowing the use of the attractants in DMAs where they're already banned. His concern was that if the DMAs keep expanding, the legal use of attractants would be diminished. The white paper was produced by our staff after extensive research citing numerous scientific studies.
It was quite revealing and left me with only one reasonable conclusion. Some facts about CWD that we all already know. CWD is always fatal to deer. Once prions, the infectious agents of CWD, are on the landscape, they can remain there and be infectious for long periods of time, even greater than 5 years. Once a case of CWD occurs in a new area, a DMA is established. A DMA is a very, very expensive proposition for the Pennsylvania Game Commission. To set one up and manage it will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, perhaps up to $1 million. Currently, we have very few options in trying to prevent and slow down the spread of this terrible disease. As far as attractants are concerned, we know a 4-ounce bottle of attractant can contain as many as 12 lethal doses of prions. The captive cervid industry that produces the urine attractants is unregulated by an independent agency. Now, we had people here talk today who I think are very reputable people, but still the agency is not, the producers are not regulated by an independent agency. Even in certified herds of captive cervids, CWD has still been found. If we allow the continued use of urine attractants, we can say with almost 100% certainty that prions will be placed on the landscape where CWD does not currently exist, and that has the potential to be a true disaster. I feel a reasonable analogy is placing landmines in our precious habitat that the Pennsylvania Game Commission is sworn to protect. Why would we do that? Thank you.
I'm not sure where he came up with that landmine analogy, but Your Honor, I'd like to further that suggestion because most of the Pennsylvania Game Commission owned grounds need landmines to make it better deer habitat. So that was the best idea I got of that. In case, for those of you who missed the point, I had to pull this out.
As far as attractants are concerned, we know a 4-ounce bottle of attractant can contain as many as 12 lethal doses of prions.
Yeah, let's question the doctor. Davin?
Yeah, so I don't know where he got that number, but just the fact that he's saying lethal doses, it almost certainly goes back to a mouse study, which is intracranial inoculation of concentrated urine, or equivalents of brain inoculated into a mouse. Like, we don't know lethal doses for deer. Like, there's zero. I mean, we've estimated it using RT-Click, but we don't know it like a lethal dose. And honestly, those mouse studies are in LD50s, which is 50% lethal doses. So, I mean, that statement is so not true. And during that, when he was making that comment, I'm shaking my head in the audience, saying like, no, that's not true. It's like there's no
I heard you
scientific
actually
evidence to support
said.
that.
So someone in attendance told me you said that's not true. I don't know if you remember that or not, but yeah.
I don't understand. I mean, clearly someone gave him that number. He didn't, research the literature and find that on his own. So there's just been a misunderstanding of what the science says. And when you talk about lethal doses, we don't know a lethal dose for a deer, especially a lethal dose for urine. Because no deer's ever been infected with CWD from being given urine. Mm-hmm. So it's just, there's no way that, first of all, that no one knows that answer to that question with any certainty. And I've tried to estimate it as best I can based on the science and the literature, and I'll be happy to debate that with anyone, where I got those numbers from. And, 10 to 16 ounces is kind of is the only thing I could settle on is one infectious dose. So that's like, you need 4 4-ounce bottles to even come close to one infectious dose. And, let me remind you that those numbers are based on the most positive urine samples we ever tested.
Yeah.
It's not based on your average sample from a CWD positive deer, which was negative. So, I mean,
so an animal that is at the end of the disease course, in other words.
Yes.
Yeah.
The most positive ones we found. That's the only way we can get a number is because those are the only positive ones we have,
Yeah. So that 10 to 16 ounce estimate that you've come up with, or that you just mentioned, equals one infectious dose.
one infectious dose.
That dose is administered where, in theoretically, would be administered how? Orally?
Or orally. That's our estimate of an oral infectious dose.
So what's the
per
last
deer.
time you saw a white-tailed deer drinking 16 ounces of piss?
Exactly. So that's why it's my conclusion. It's been my conclusion since before I started, working on this, that the liquid urine is not a vector, is not a way that CWD is transmitted. It's just not. It's not. They have to drink a lot of pee for that to happen.
So did
and a very, very unlucky pee too from one deer that happened to be at the very end of his disease.
Yeah, it's his last pee, no doubt. Or
Right.
So you said no deer has ever been infected with CWD by given urine, right?
That's true. There was a study that was published in Science, and then there were 3 deer at CSU inoculated with only urine, and there were also deer inoculated with only feces, and none of those deer got sick at all, and that paper was never actually published. So,
okay. And there was a paper before that, I think you already mentioned it, where they gave both feces and urine and didn't separate them out. So then the question, that comes up, well, which one? Okay. You set the record straight. So I've got, no, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
I've got, let's see, Commissioner, we can't leave he reported as himself being the newest member of the commission, Todd Pride. Again, I don't know him. One of the frustrating things for me is many of these folks, I looked up a few of them, they're almost protected by the Secret Service. You can't find their contact information on the PGC's website. If they represent my district or they represent me, which they don't, I don't think, if they're appointed by the governor, I don't understand why. I should be able to reach out to them and say, hey, this is how I want you to vote, but that's not how it's set up. This is not, the Game Commission is structured completely different than what we, the people, wanted to establish our new republic as. They should all have to go before the duly elected legislature for approval under a checks and balances process. Okay. So Todd Pride, let's see, Todd, I think Todd you can find his email if you want to reach out. Todd at legacylandwater.org, owns a company, I guess. But he's been studying this for 6 years, Davin. I don't know much more about his background. His sales approach is to bring emotion into it. I can smell that. And he claims that he was told that CWD started in captive farms, in quotes. Interesting. And he's going to focus on the science. So let me make sure I hit the right hot button here.
Comments?
Mike, I'd like to, or Mr. President, I'd like to say something. Being the newest member here could be a perspective that maybe I don't have any knowledge of this issue, but I've been studying this issue for 6+ years. And one of the first conversations I had on this issue, and outside of my role here running a training operation in fishing, birding, hunting, conservation activities, this is core to the work that I do. And a big part of the environments that we work in are funded by license-paying hunters pursuing white-tailed deer, which I think represents over 80% of the commission's revenue. And so from that conversation 6+ years ago with the former deer biologist for the Game Commission and then a number of other scientists, I asked him the question, where do you think this is going with CWD? And he said, Todd, it's never going away. And I asked the question, well, where did it start? And he said, captive farms. And digging into the science and the folding of proteins that happens from the start of this and the creation of it. And then fast forward to recently in some of the conversations around the urine attractants, and I asked the question, are all the urine attractants coming from captive farms? And the answer was yes. So following up on my fellow commissioner, Denny Fredericks, I think it's important that we focus on the science, we focus on the future generations, and we have information that is pretty clear to us. And so I feel it's important for us to support the staff and what they've given to us, all the research that's been done. And I think, all of us have done, our own research and more than it supports, I think, the decisions that we're going to make. So I just wanted to to share that, because I think it's extremely important of what's in front of us, and to the point that what we decide on today, we'll revisit this again in the way that it happens in January. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Prick.
Interesting approach there. I'll let you comment if you have any before my next hot button, which will definitely distract you.
I mean, it's the same thing. He's getting information from, it's the deer farm bias again, rolled into the, if it comes from a deer farm, it must be bad.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just not true. Even the deer farms that are only in the USDA herd certification program, there are, potentially a handful that test positive every year, but there's 6,000 deer farms in the U.S. plus. I'm not sure if that's an accurate number anymore, maybe more or less, but there's thousands, and a handful test positive, and it's and they're moving deer in and around all over the place throughout the program. So, I mean, it seems to me that program in and of itself is working relatively well to keep CWD out of the vast majority of the deer farms, and then add on to the extra protections like not importing deer and double fencing and that sort of thing with the deer urine producers, and they're extra insulated from that sort of thing. So it's an argument that says if it comes from them, it must be bad, and I don't really buy into that. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's interesting. Why do they all target the deer farm? I don't understand what's the hatred for them.
I think
maybe, and I guess this is more a friend asking.
Yeah, there might be evidence. I don't know exactly how CWD came to the state of Pennsylvania, but it may very well have been through, a deer farm. And definitely Wisconsin and Canada transported, CWD to other states through deer farms. So it's not that it hasn't happened, but it's happened the other way, where deer farms have been infected from wild deer.
Right, but you cannot say that. To my knowledge, I've asked most of the experts. I haven't got. If you're listening to this and you're one of them, I'll get there. But the infectious origin has. It's kind of like when you're the general contractor and the house falls down. There's all your subs pointing their finger across the way at the other guy. It's not my fault.
Right.
I didn't do it. And they're very obviously you're in Colorado, where it was first identified, first found.
Right.
There's 3,000 different ways to say that, not where it originated or initiated. Just because it was found in a deer farm in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or whatever first does not mean that that's where it started, unless you've tested every single one. Now we go back to COVID, right? Oh, well,
Right.
Positive numbers are up. Well, you idiot. Let's look at death count, right? The goal with any disease is to inoculate your body, or most disease, I should say, is to inoculate, especially a coronavirus, inoculate your body to an extent that you can handle it. Right? Mm-hmm. So it's not a bad thing necessarily that you're testing positive, but when you get into the CWD realm and people start testing, there's very few people in Wisconsin who want to come on this podcast who I've invited to talk about the origin, the beginning, where did it start? And to my knowledge, I think they were just simply taking just a blind stab and testing critters based on one person's recommendation, and look, positive CWD. That does not mean it hasn't been there for generations. That just means you just started testing.
Yeah, the best origin I've ever heard, or that makes sense to me, is that scrapie is a disease of sheep, it's in the same family as CWD. It's a prion disease, and it's the only other infectious disease that can transmit from animal to animal. Like, so one sheep can give it to another sheep, and one deer can give it to another deer. No other prion diseases are like that. So it seems that farm sheep in the U.S. had scrapie. It definitely had scrapie, and it somehow transferred to deer. That's the only real scientific evidence that makes sense to me for where CWD came from. So obviously it wasn't a deer farm, that somehow caused this whole problem. So I mean, it happened a very long time ago. So we don't really know.
Time hides things, and I've tried to go back as far as I can, and unfortunately some of the major players are no longer alive, but scrapie or sheep in that same research facility in Colorado has been mentioned. And my question to some folks who were there relatively early on the scene regarding sheep and scrapie and a potential origin was have been immediately shot down and you can hear on, Mike said, or Dr. Miller said, there weren't sheep there to my knowledge, but I can go in the literature and find references to having sheep at that research facility. I don't know what your personal or professional opinion is on the popularity of the sheep scrapie origin, but
Yeah, I don't know if it happened at, I don't, I've heard that story as well about CSU, and since it was discovered there, that's where it came from. I mean, I don't think that makes sense necessarily. I don't know where it came from. And I think it was in Colorado or Wyoming, substantially prior to, 1960 when it was discovered. I don't think it was something that just popped up, within a recent time period. So I don't know where it came from, but,
so what's your opinion and how did it get from, basically that Colorado, Wyoming endemic region to Wisconsin?
To Wisconsin. I think so I don't know I don't know the answer to that question. However, based on looking at it geographically and how it popped up in Canada and South Korea from transporting animals, I think that's probably how it happened, is the human transport of positive deer, whether that was for, being released or, maybe a deer carcass was transported or elk carcass from Colorado back to Wisconsin on the farm somewhere, or whether it was farm deer that were transferred from a, positive herd in one state to Wisconsin and then it escaped that facility out into the wild.
I guess the skeptic in me, though, questions that. I'm even hearing you be sold that. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but everybody wants to move on to the next topic when I start talking about this, because I'm like, what has nobody, we just got done talking about how the fact that the Pennsylvania Game Commission or this biologist or whoever basically hates captive farms. And I don't, one way or the other, it doesn't matter to me. But it just adds to, maybe it's the inquisitive nature. Maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist. That's what people call you now when you ask questions. But it seems odd to me that they're tagging it on to the captive. It had to move because of humans moved a cervid of some sort from Wyoming or whatever, Colorado to Wisconsin. I don't know. I think you make the bed you sleep in, and I feel like the people who are selling that have already proven that they're not trustworthy. And like you said, it's a very, very long time ago, the 1967 stuff in Colorado, and unfortunately Beth passed away. And some of the people in Wisconsin who I want to interview on this podcast, one especially has declined. Simply because that individual is no longer, I guess retired. That individual is retired, and wants nothing to do with it. But my point is you can, there's historical context and facts here that we need to capture before you die. We've already lost a couple of really good researchers who were there at the origin, since we discovered it. To me, it's a disservice to not offer up at least what and it sort of makes me wonder, is there something that, okay, I retired, phew, the agency has told me shut up about this, don't keep talking. Enough of my conspiracy theory on CWD, but certainly can't prove it wrong. So go ahead, I'm gonna let you comment on any of that if you want.
Yeah, I mean, looking at geographically how hotspot showed up in Wisconsin and then in Pennsylvania and in Canada, way north, and there's a bunch of elk farms up there. I don't think deer walked to all those places, I guess would be my summation of how
right.
Like,
but has anybody done?
Looks.
I get that, but has anybody done extensive research on the testing? Right. So when did the testing start? When did it begin? Because I watched Americans do this with COVID. Right, they're running to get a test, primarily so they don't have to go to work. Right, I don't have to worry, but I have to work because nobody guarantees me a paycheck. But the testing to me was ridiculous. If you have the symptoms, if you're symptomatic, it makes sense. We're doing with white-tailed deer. We just have people out there at the time. I was told, biologists in other states, who were told, hey, you better start testing some of your animals, just blindly testing animals. Well, at what point, do you say, wait a minute, you just started testing animals, right? There's an awful lot there that you're missing.
Right. I mean, the testing, and I don't know the facts about Wisconsin and how it started or where it started, as well as, I'm sure someone from the USDA who did, because they do very detailed study, like epidemiological studies on, every kind of new case in a new area. Arkansas all of a sudden had CWD out of the middle of nowhere, and not just a little bit, like they had one positive and they tested again and they had nothing. Like they tested like 100 positive, elk and deer in the state, which means that there's a relatively high prevalence in certain areas of Arkansas. And no one knows how it got there.
Yeah.
So it could have been the elk had it since they moved them from Colorado, and it's been hiding there, and no one knew. And once they started doing more testing, they found it. If you look at Wisconsin and like the way over the years on how CWD is kind of radiated out from that point, like you can see the walking pace of CWD, like the natural environmental transmission of it, spreading into southern Minnesota and then now into, farther parts of northern Minnesota and then down into Illinois and, over into Michigan now. And that seems natural to me, like that kind of pace. Mm-hmm. But when it jumps from like Colorado to, Wisconsin, or like from, all of a sudden it's in the middle of Canada and they test, in Montana and Idaho and North Dakota, and there's no CWD. And then now, like 10 years later, it's kind of radiated down, and now we're starting to see positive cases both at the north end and at the south end of Montana, but not in the middle. So that tells me that there's some CWD walking around in those animals. But there definitely were events that moved it in a way which were not natural to me, like basically based on looking at the map.
Sure, fair enough. We should be reminded that when they discovered it in '67, it was in a captive facility, not a captive farm, I guess. Right? And that was not a private captive facility. That was owned by the state of Colorado. And
I
the question about gain of function. I've asked that question. Were they doing any gain of function on Scrapie? Meaning manipulating it. Yeah, exactly. And that's for a whole. And you will never get the truth at this point because they're already. Yeah. Well, I'll move on from that. So, good questions. I just wanted to hear your opinions on some of that. I've got based on the Pennsylvania Game Commission decision. By the way, that was a 4-4 split, dead for now. But I think that the theme is misinformation from a state biologist whom I don't know. But it sounds to me like there's, unfortunately, the 8 people in this case, who made the decision to move it forward or kill it, were given misinformation. And that's why you can't just assume and follow the science. So in the name of all that, I'm going to play this hot button for you.
Well, I'll respond to the COVID question quickly. We follow the science. What's happening now is all the major scientific operations in this country and the 25-person group we put together are looking at all the possibilities of what's happening now. We have a pandemic among the non-vaccinated, those who are not vaccinated. If you are vaccinated, you are safe. If you are vaccinated, you have over a 98% chance of never catching the virus at all. If you catch it, you're likely to, the overwhelming proof so far is you're not going to be hospitalized, you're not going to be sick, you're going to probably have no signs that you had it, and you are not going to die. So it's a simple proposition.
So Uncle Joe lied. I got it. That's everything I heard from that Game Commission meeting reminded me of that clip. We're going to follow the science with lie after lie after lie. And you don't need to comment on this. I know you're no longer within the university. But I will, just for the listeners, I know, Davin, you probably have to run. But for the listeners, this was the ultimate roll call and decision process at that meeting.
Secretary Fredericks, would you call for vote? And I would suggest that we have a roll call for the vote.
Did I understand you that you have a request for roll call vote?
Correct.
Okay. Mike Mitrick.
I would say yes, I agree.
Kristen Schnepp-Geiger.
No.
Dennis Fredericks. Yes. Alan DeMarco,
No.
Scott Forador,
Yes.
Stanley Kinnick,
No.
Todd Pride,
Yes.
Haley Sankey,
No.
Mr. President, we have a tie.
Scott Fordor didn't vote. Yes. Oh, he did vote, I'm sorry. We have a tie. That means it does not pass.
Correct. It dies.
Can be brought up again. So I'll let everybody know that.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
This
Stan?
can be brought up again.
Yes.
Not a dead issue.
That's my favorite part of the whole thing. This can be brought up again. I believe that was Commissioner Fredericks. If it wasn't, I apologize. But you can hear the emotion in that. And you can, as sportsmen and women, you can expect that they will bring this up again because they continue to follow the same junk science, emotions, ego, and just bullshit. Hey, listen, if it makes sense, it's spread in CWD, it's proven, but we've done an exhaustive literature search, and we're talking to the experts, and they say we need to be focusing on something else other than this. So, all right, well, very good. This has been a quite long podcast, Davin. I know you've got some things to do, and I have far more material on this, but I think we've exhausted it good enough on my end. I'm going to let you, of course, add anything or summarize. I know that was a lot. Anything else you want to say?
I think we did quite a bit of coverage on it, and there's a lot more issues out there that have some people saying things that aren't really true, like the plants spread CWD and that sort of thing. That the literature on that is still out. I don't think there's any scientific evidence that says that, but you hear that all the time. So it's just a common thing surrounding CWD, where people take a soundbite and then run with it as settled science. And that's just in some of the cases that's just not true.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. And I'll be doing more podcasts on CWD of all those various areas, including the genetic aspect, evolution. I think nature, as I said in my article, that started this whole thing. Nature is resilient. Nature wins, and anytime we attempt to control her, we lose. And I think that's what everybody's seeing as they try to make decisions in boardroom, across the country, and they bring up all this junk science and miseducation of America regarding chronic wasting disease. And that starts at the very top and it goes all through the system. So, Dr. Davin Henderson, I'm glad that you started CWD Evolution. I'm a fan of capitalism. I believe that's what built America. That's what makes us great. And I know that you will continue to innovate with your RT Quick and all the other goodies that are about to come. So thank you for doing that. Keep trudging forward. And if you ever prove, without beyond the shadow of a doubt, that deer piss does in fact transmit CWD or infect others with CWD, please let me know first.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on, Jason.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate
All
it.
right. Thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Have a good one. Bye.
Hey, you too. All right. So in closing, I'll wrap this up. I know that was a rather lengthy podcast. Appreciate Davin for coming on and clearing some of that up. I'm sure I'll get plenty of mail and nasty grams from that one. But the scientific process, as we were once taught but has since been forgotten, is about careful, objective evaluation and observation while applying rigorous skepticism about what's being observed. An honest scientist, one who's actually motivated by seeking honest data, would form a hypothesis, make predictions based on their hypothesis, test that hypothesis, and then collect their data in an honest and accurate manner. Relentlessly interpret their data, right? That would be one thing. And then obviously they would present those data. And, they obviously would establish conclusions and management implications based on those data. So scientific process, truthfully, is never over, in my mind anyway, but instead those same methods are then copied and repeated by other scientists or perhaps the same scientist to determine if different outcomes occur or if the same outcome is accomplished. That, my friends, is the scientific process. Politicians are not scientists, and they should remain out of the funding of, design of, and the interpretation of the scientific process. A successful scientist has to be humble enough to admit when he or she is wrong. I'm not so sure that my initial sentence was completely wrong, but it certainly wasn't completely accurate. So I'm going to say that I was wrong. But hopefully this deep dive was educational for many of you. And someday, sometime in your profession, you can admit that you were wrong. So finally, I should mention that my views as a private wildlife biologist and truth-seeking whitetail fanatic tend to most certainly be somewhat of a voice in the wilderness among modern-day deer managers and most certainly some of my peers. Virtually every university, state wildlife agency, and conservation group, for that matter, seem to be marching in lockstep with the take-the-gloves-off approach to CWD management. And that's fine. I think that their lack of traction and the fact that they have not moved the needle at all, if at all, maybe a little bit, not sure, I think is evidence to that. So again, I hope my approach and relentless work on this podcast and elsewhere provide fuel and fodder for campfire conversations at your deer camp this fall. Thanks for listening.